Disclaimer. Although no vulgar language was used in this video, the lack of profanities is well compensated for by the absolute futility of its content.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So I was thinking that today we can try to do our best to at the very least remain south of proper as we try to explore the imperative subject of boredom. I want to go to, as usual, is going to be the dictionary. How does the dictionary define boredom? And here I have it written down. It says boredom is defined as a noun, the state of feeling bored. It's rather frustrating that you go to the dictionary, now in Google. Back in the days, we used to have to go on the dictionary and look in alphabetical order, only to find a definition that doesn't define anything. The state
and it uses the same word, which is ridiculous.
So then I go to bored, the adjective, the state of feeling bored. And it says, feeling worry because one is unoccupied or lacks interest in one's current activity. All right, so two things that I know so far is, one, that the dictionary leaves us wanting for more, but the other one is that it assumes that not being busy is what boredom is, being unoccupied, which later I think we're going to disagree with. Explore this, we'll see that that's not the case. And then I look up another word that Yelena and I were looking at earlier, which is bore, the verb, to be somebody who's a bore. And it says to make someone feel worried or uninterested by tedious talk or dullness. I think that's pretty funny because we've all met somebody who can take a topic and just by the way they talk about it, we become bored, right? Excessive talking, for example. There has to be nothing more annoying than that. So, are you with me? Yeah, it's a state of being bored, meaning it's an active thing. Mm-hmm. But it's not enough as a definition. It could go into much more length, and that's why now we're going to transition to the one branch that I think answers a lot of questions, philosophy. The reason for that is that boredom, what makes it unique is that it eludes definition, meaning people over the years have had so many different definitions of boredom that there isn't one fully formed definition. And I think that's why the dictionary cuts to the chase and says it's just a state of being bored, because there's so many complex definitions that we're going to look into. So I was looking into this branch of philosophy and realizing that philosophers have been talking about boredom since the beginning of times, pretty much, right? Since way before, many years before Christ. The subjective nature of boredom, again, makes it impossible to define. In medieval times, it was considered a demonic possession, pretty much. Perhaps the first philosopher, who later on we come to know as a philosopher, to talk about boredom was Solomon, King Solomon, from Ecclesiastes. Right? And Solomon didn't say much. Solomon mainly described himself feeling bored in the Ecclesiastes. And the way he writes about it is much better than the way we can ever write about it today. He says, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. And when I was reading that, I thought it was so funny because it's spot on. When you feel bored, it's something that you're not happy with what you see and you're not satisfied with what you hear.
So there's no stimulation to the senses.
Yeah. It's a feeling of general, total dissatisfaction with everything. The next person down the line in time is Seneca. And Seneca, he was, I'm sure I know, Martin, you read about Seneca before. He was a Stoic philosopher, and he lived through the Roman Empire only a few years before Christ. And he wrote an essay titled On Tranquility. And in that essay, he writes a letter to a friend of his named Serenus, who always seemed to need a lot of help, by the way, and advice. And Seneca cautions him against depression. He says, make sure you don't get depressed. And then he does something that is almost as bad as the dictionary. He tells his friend how to overcome depression. And I'm going to quote what he says. He says, you ask what help, in my opinion, should be employed to overcome this tedium. The best course would be to occupy oneself with practical matters, the management of public affairs, and the duties of a citizen. His advice against depression is to get busy. And if it was so easy, I think it's insulting, quite frankly. The idea is get busy and you won't be bored. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Isn't there a quote like that?
About that.
Huh?
You can be busy with boring stuff that's boring for you.
Right.
That's not really going to help.
When you go to a therapist and the therapist tells you, think happy thoughts, and you won't be depressed. Don't focus on the negative, focus on the positive, when all you can think of is the negative because you're feeling down and depressed. The other thing Seneca did, though, he categorized two types of boredom. And he was a pioneer. He was, according to the records, the first one to categorize two types of boredom. The first kind of boredom that he describes is the boredom for somebody, like we said, who is busy. Somebody who is always in a constant state of movement and involved with things, but yet bored, existentially not being able to find his or her purpose. And the second type, which we were talking about, I was saying, I'm hoping that I never find myself being the second one, is the one that yawns.
This generation of Americans has been tested.
Violation. No politics.
Seneca says that there are those two types of people, right? The idea is that as philosophy progresses, the definition gets more refined. And I think that by that means that God comes into the question. Martin, do you have anything so far that you want to add to what I'm saying?
Yes, maybe the term of the word bored it's been changing over the years, over the centuries, over thousands of years. And in different moments of the history, that word, that concept is been changing. Because to be bored or be bored thousands of years back in the days is not the same to be bored now.
That's very true.
Today, I went to the farm and I sat down with a guy who works at the farm. He's from Guatemala. He does farm work. He works with his hands, with his body. He doesn't use his mind too much for his job. He doesn't require it. And he sat down and we started talking. And he said, I had my iPad. I was working on material for tonight. And he said, what are you working on? His Spanish is quite broken because he speaks dialects mainly. And I said, boredom. And, he looked puzzled. And I could tell that he could not fathom the idea that someone could be bored, because he stopped for 2 seconds and then he took off and continued doing his work. But before he did, we started talking about how different, we were talking about this earlier, so it was kind of funny to have the same conversation with somebody. He said, it's about the upbringing. He said, because in countries like mine, from a very early age, kids are expected to work to contribute. They're expected to work to contribute. So boredom doesn't even cross their mind. Right? And I thought that's an interesting thing to discuss. It's fine to talk about philosophy, psychology, literature, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the practicality of it. And I think that being boredom has a significant cultural, and that's kind of what you were saying earlier, Martin, factor to it. Like in some cultures, boredom might not be something that people know. Henry Thoreau, who was an American writer and philosopher, he said something. He said that, not to offend anyone, but he said that boredom was an illness of the unintelligent.
All right.
That people who spend more time in their minds, per se, were more prone to become bored, existentially stagnant, idle, than people who were not. And that's contradictory to something that somebody else said earlier before him, but that's kind of what you're saying. Is something outside of his experience. Martin was saying something earlier, which is sometimes language organizes our experiences. And in certain languages, boredom may have a very different meaning than it does in English.
Right, or different cultural significance.
Yes. One of the things that attracted my attention was when I hear the following dialogue. How are you doing, or what are you up to? And the person will say, I'm just here killing time. We don't kill time, time kills us. But that's an example of what you were saying earlier, Martin, about how we construct reality, right? Through the use
of the language.
Correct. And I think that you were talking about the work of a contemporary German philosopher who did an exhaustive work on the way in which, through language and hermeneutics and whatnot, we organize experience.
Right.
His work is way too complicated,
right,
for many people, even for people who read his work. But he delved into that slightly. His name is Martin, like you, and he's saying here that he lived from 1889 to 1976. I think I would probably mispronounce the last name.
Heidegger.
Heidegger, right? Martin Heidegger. If you can sum it up to a few points, what would you say are the most relevant points that he contributes to understanding the experience of the word boredom?
Boredom is a mood that in many aspects is like an absence of mood. It is indeed a mood, a fundamental attachment. But for him, it's also, paradoxically, a kind of not mood. And he said a very good quote. He said, philosophy is born in the nothingness of boredom.
Our natural state is one of boredom. He's not the first person to say that. There's another philosopher, I think I want to say it's Pascal, but he says that our natural state is that of boredom. That we do everything to occupy boredom, but if we are left to our own devices, our natural state of being is boredom. I think there are a few things to consider when we talk about the subject. One of them is that it is a mood. And one thing that I was reading about this guy was saying that a mood is not influenced by external or internal factors. Mood and anxiety exist outside of both. It's just an energy, right, that flows through us. Okay. That it changes all the time. I think
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And maybe the first questions for the human being, the first universal philosophical questions, start in the mind of the individual because they were bored, and they start to think about existentially, about God, about everything.
It's funny that you say that, because Friedrich Nietzsche said that. He was saying that in one of his books. He said that boredom has a fundamental role in society because God was bored. That's what Nietzsche says. And we don't know if he's joking around. He says God was bored, and so God created the earth, and then he got even more bored because earth was boring him to death. So according to Nietzsche, God then created man for his mere entertainment, and then he realized that man was bored. So then he created animals and women, and then he was then entertained, and seeing, judging by the way things are, when you put man and woman on Earth, it's quite entertaining. You're a guy, you gotta picture that. You're probably sitting by with some popcorn and watching married couples go at it, But this is actually factual. Nietzsche did write about that. And he's saying that boredom goes as far back as Adam and Eve. So yeah, the biggest philosophical question is, how far back does boredom go? Has it always been part of our existence? Or is it something that is contemporary from today? Our conversation earlier was about, were we as easily and frequently bored as kids as our kids are today?
Well, putting that question, you just made some thoughts ran through my head, Juan, which were, for example, let's look at back when man was just a primitive being, and their train of thought was to hunt, to eat, to live, or to escape prey. And I don't think they felt boredom. You know what I mean? They were in a constant state of alert. They were constantly either, I'm hungry, I need to eat, trying to hunt and kill something, or they were running away from other animals that were preying on them. And, and it just got that thought in my head, and I don't think they were bored. I don't think they could, so maybe with that thought, there's got to be a sort of a certain level of intelligence.
Did they have even a capacity to be bored at this, at that?
Probably not.
If they were just like a very primitive, on that kind of level, it's like, do you even have a capacity?
Well, I was talking to a friend of mine. He's very, very faithful in the religion and Christianity, and intimidatingly intelligent. He's superbly intelligent. And I joked around and I said, do you think that Jesus was ever bored? Do you think Jesus ever went up to Mary and said, Mom? And Mary said, what? She said, I'm bored. And then, Mary said something like, I don't know, go and play with rocks. I don't know what, they didn't have any PlayStations. They didn't have too much to entertain themselves, per se. And I thought he was going to laugh, but he didn't. He really took it seriously. And then he said, no, there's no way that Jesus ever got bored, because he had a purpose. He knew what his purpose was from early on. If you read the Bible, you see that since he was very, very young, he was already going to the temple to preach. So the idea is, once you know your purpose, then you can be bored. Right.
Once we understand and decide for us individually, what are we going to do in life, which is include the purpose or some kind of vision, boredom becomes not really a big issue. Once you understand your mindset, boredom becomes not really a big part of your life, because you use it as a free time, right? Juan, I don't think you are too much bored, because you use every minute, and we are at 10 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, I'm not bored because I want to record this thing.
You were a little upset because it was last minute that I called you, but I saved you, I rescued you from boredom.
I was not bored. I was not bored, okay? I was far away from being bored. I have a purpose.
So let's address a few variables. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the variables of boredom. The first one that I can think of is that it can be interactional, meaning two people can be bored together. Do we agree?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. I will not be a couple therapist if that was not true. Another variable is frequency. And the idea is that frequency of an activity can render the same activity that once entertained you boring. Meaning, if you do the same thing, it doesn't matter how much you like it. If you do it too frequently, you can get bored. It can become boring. Even video games for kids become boring. Whereas I don't want to play anymore.
Can having fun become boring?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so too. I think so too, because it's anything of too much. Anything of too much.
Okay, so we're in agreement that frequency is the variable that affects boredom, that we should try to regulate frequency to some degree.
Yeah, we will talk about to be bored at job, working, at work.
Right.
Absolutely. You can be bored at work. You could be doing a
Absolutely.
mundane job.
So
that
being
your
busy,
heart isn't into it. You're not interested in it, but it's simple to do, whether it be with your hands or, you know, a simple job or
Yeah,
sometimes on
or
a computer.
the frequency or the routine of the work
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it becomes bored. Maybe you like your work, it's your passion, but the frequency is what gets you bored.
yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
And I think it's actually the lack of personal growth at work, because you're doing the same thing over and over, that can create the boredom. It has to be a progress as both, let's say, partners grow with age, they develop maturity, right? It has to be.
Or they become more boring. I've seen a couple, an old couple at Panera Bread,
Yeah,
staring at each other, not exchanging a single word, sometimes not even looking at one another, just standing there. That's just
they're
existing.
just there.
They're bored. So that kind of proves my first point, which is frequency, but also interrelational. Two people can be bored to death together. I really believe, if you're going literature, perhaps like the most illustrated piece of literature is Waiting for Godot, right? By Samuel Beckett. It's a play in the 1950s where two people are waiting for Godot who never comes. Something that never comes. They're bored together and the play ends and nothing happens. And I think that when you're in a relationship that is boring, it feels like that. It feels like two people waiting for something that never really occurs.
Yeah.
It can be a state of mind, but it's difficult to change a state of mind outside of context. No matter how curious you are, you can say, I'm curious, why are you so freaking boring, I guess. But outside of that, it's difficult because you come home wanting to party it up, for example, and then maybe your partner doesn't necessarily feel that way and wants to be bored. Probably the most important one for me that Yelena mentioned at one point was the absence of love. When you are, simply put, when you're in love with someone or with something, you can be bored. Or what Yelena said was, if I'm in love with someone, I cannot experience boredom with that person. I cannot experience it because I'm in love with the person. However, frequency does come into place.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It has to be a progress. Yes, you're in love with a person, it wears off. It's a natural course of relationship. So it has to be a change in a relationship and a development to experience newness. Is that the right word?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, it can be. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to, who cares if we can invent it, but the thing is, let's say you and I are in love. So we fall in love. And you say, oh, what an interesting guy. He's just so, he has an Argentine accent, whatever people say. He knows how to read and write. I don't know. He's not, he doesn't look like Danny DeVito, whatever, and you fall in love. And then he's so funny. So I'm in love with him. Everything is, you see everything through the lenses of novelty, so you cannot be bored. But then I come around 5 minutes later and I want to spend time. And then 5 minutes later, after I left, I want to come and spend time again. And the next day I text you, hey, how are you doing? And then at night I send you another text, how is it going? At some point, through mere frequency, I render myself boring. You run out of new things to say to me. The same thing that you said to me in the first day, now it starts to be repetitive, and I render myself boring. So a person in love should then try to preserve that feeling by regulating the frequency. That's, I don't know if you,
what do you mean?
That you should try, if you want to extend the feeling of being
see each other every other day,
you should try to sometimes not text. Sometimes just don't say anything.
Well, isn't it, I guess, the fact that they're expecting that call? And I think this is where we get a little bit of, the friction here. Because one person may be expecting the call and expecting the frequency,
Mhm.
and the other person, that the frequency is boring them, and they're finding it too dependable, and they're finding that it's not something of interest. It's beginning to bore them because it's happening so frequently, and they're not enjoying the newness of it, as Yelena said.
So in line with what Martin was saying is, you could prevent boredom in a relationship. How do you do it? You make yourself a little more exclusive. Sometimes you tell the person, don't hate me, but can you please go? But that way you kind of
I
organize
think you need it.
the
Go
relationship
ahead.
a little bit. If you're always available and you're always, you saturate yourself, your presence becomes saturated, then the person is not going to find you as enchanting. That's a different topic entirely.
We're talking about boundaries now. I think it's different topic.
No,
Yeah.
but we're talking about the next variable that you mentioned about boredom. We talked about frequency, interrelational dynamics. We talked about the absence of love or the presence of love. But then you mentioned the absence of effort. The absence of effort is the same in a relationship. If you make yourself so available in your relationship that you remove the effort, what happens then? It renders everything boring. It renders the relationship boring. So if you want to really ruin a new relationship, all you have to do is increase the frequency, remove the effort, and you're cooking a disaster. You're really cooking in a wonderful disaster. It's guaranteed that about 2 days, he or she may be with somebody else. I'll not tell you, for sure. You should never say that.
That's fast.
Right. I left for last the idea of culture and upbringing. I remember, Weeby, you asked me a question about why do you think I think that children are so easily bored nowadays? You have Vanessa, I have Sophia, and what I said was that we are raising children out of boredom today. Our concern as parents are to entertain our children out of boredom in general. We have become, I think I said to you,
Entertainers.
Right, behind every easily bored child is an entertainer for the parent. It's a parent who says, what should we do so Charlie doesn't get bored? If we go on vacation, who can we bring with Charlie so Charlie doesn't get bored with us? Growing up, Martin and I, if we went on vacation somewhere, it was a luxury. We didn't care where we went. So long as they call it vacation, you can go to the corner. And we were excited. We got in the car, oh, we're on vacation, maybe you're going to the corner. But they didn't worry about us. I remember when Martin and I went on vacation, rarely, our parents will take a nap. They will take a nap for 2 hours. Go and do whatever you want. And then we took off in the streets and we were ecstatic, right? But we didn't get bored, and our parents were not concerned with us getting bored. I don't think I speak for very few people here. I think a lot of people here, even here in the States, if you look at the generations past, I'm from 83, I was born in 83. Anybody born in 83 in the States even will tell you, that was my experience. My parents took us on vacation. It was something unique, and they didn't care much about us getting bored. Our parents were not consumed with the concern of, is Charlie or, is Tiffany bored? It's a new thing. I think what it does is that it really weakens the children's immune state, right?
The resilience.
They're resilient, right? It kills their imagination. They don't know what to do, and they're easily bored because they're not used to not being bored. They're used to being catered to, so that they're not bored. So in the process of trying to get them to not be bored, we're not allowing them to experience it enough to strengthen their immune system for it. That's why they say I'm bored so easily, and you give them many options, and they say, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. Meaning frequency. I've done this for too long. I play video games for too long. I don't want to play video games. They don't know what to do. So upbringing, a big deal. I don't think this video is going to help anyone watching to stop doing it. I think every parent watching this will say, that's so true.
Everyone's got to do it different, yeah.
But it just it's an awareness that it's good to be educated on. And if you catch yourself when I'm bored in a relationship, let me discuss a vacation. I don't know, but it's good to understand how you feel when you're bored and understand, hey, I want to dance, and hey, I want to watch cat videos, whatever, to bring you out of this state of boredom.
When you're bored, you're not thinking, I'm going to do something to get me out of boredom. anything that you consider feels dull. You think of cat video and like, no, I don't want to do that. You think about it, no, I don't want to do that. You know, I think that a good definition of boredom, much better than the one in the dictionary, would be the perception of the absence of possibilities and the lack of purpose. The feeling that life isn't, life is purpose.
Can we add lazy?
No, I think that those two contribute to laziness. They contribute.
Yeah, well, they contribute to laziness in the sense of they don't want to think of any other possibilities. They want to be in that state and not really get themselves out of it. I feel a lot of times.
The ultimate expression of boredom is suicide. It's suicide. You know, suicide means there's such an absence of possibilities that the only one left, the only one I can take is to not be anymore.
It can be a one of the thing contributing to it, but obviously not the only one.
Philosophers have spoken about this rather relatively close to now, not so far in medieval times or anything, but in the 1970s, 1950s, they talked about life being meaningless, life being completely meaningless, and then suicide is the only way out of it. It's the complete absence of possibilities. The idea that when you look, it's a general state of emotional checkmate. When I look to my left, there's nothing. When I look to my right, there's nothing. There are no moves to be made, except the last one.
Right.
You know,
even though it could technically be false, in their mind, that's their only option left. But right there, I think there could definitely be other options. They just fail to. They don't see the other avenues of possibility, and that's why they would take.
Right. It can be false. I think that it doesn't matter if it's false or not.
To them, it's right. That's their only option.
Our productivity has been interrupted with COVID-19. America is a very productive country, and we identify our self-worth through productivity. So much so that when you ask somebody here, how are you? They say, I'm busy. I've been busy. They don't tell you how they're doing. They say, I have been busy. And it's looked upon. Another thing is, a common compliment here is, wow, you're one busy guy, huh? One busy girl, huh? People tell you that assuming that you like to hear that. They say, you're always doing projects. Oh my God, I don't know how you do it. You're so busy. So the fact that we derive so much self-worth through how much we do, not what we do necessarily, but through how much we do, when that productivity is shattered or prevented by the situation right now, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to define ourselves. The other conclusion is that we have created a context of waiting. People say, I can't wait for this to be over. And when you do that, you're screwed. Because when you create a context of waiting, time itself bends. It seems longer, right? Mm-hmm. And usually people who says, if somebody comes up to you and says, Martin says, can't wait for this virus to be over so I can do A, B, and C, they're not gonna do A, B, and C. You need to know that they're not gonna do it. They tell you, I cannot wait for the virus to be over to do all the things that I didn't do before the virus. Meaning most likely they will not do them in the future either. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we took away from today, I think, is that we get bored when we underestimate the homicidal nature of time. My premise for this conversation is that we don't kill time, but rather that time kills us. When people forget that, they get bored. They get distracted from life. Those philosophers who associated being busy is not an antidote against boredom. We concluded, I think Weeby was mentioning that you can be at work and be bored. Actually, a lot of people watching this must be watching it from work, you know? Mm-hmm. And we may be very well rescuing them from boredom as they're working from home. And the other thing is that boredom is a mood, meaning that it's not affected externally or internally. It's just is. Boredom is defined. Right. And the final one, and I think it's probably the only antidote that I can think of for boredom, is that people always seek to distract themselves from boredom. People seek to escape boredom through entertainment. And I think that when you're trying to kill time through entertainment, it's a very dull weapon to attempt that. Entertainment is ephemeral, and that means that it has a beginning and an end, like a shooting star. If you watch Dexter on Netflix, it's wonderful. It's entertaining. You escape your reality. Maybe you have a job that you don't like. Maybe you don't have enough money to pay your bills. So what do? You say, I want to escape. Maybe you feel existentially stagnant. So you escape. But then it ends. After so many seasons and episodes, Dexter ends. And entertainment is characterized by the fact that it begins and it ends. A life project isn't. A life project is something that goes on forever. It doesn't have an end. It's open-ended. You say you want to study the work of Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, you can spend 2 lifetimes doing that. Another difference between entertainment and a life project is that entertainment doesn't have a difficulty. Unless you're playing Fortnite. And by the way, I've been playing Fortnite for 3 days and I'm in first place already by hiding. People shoot themselves. But a life project does. A life project bears some responsibility. There are parts of it that are difficult. It has difficulty to it. And I think that the issue with boredom is that when people seek to escape boredom, the perception that there's an absence of possibilities and a lack of purpose, through entertainment, the more that they stay entertained outside of the reality, the more that the reality thickens, and the more difficult it is for them to get back to their own reality. And that's where boredom can become, what you were saying, Yelena, can become depression. So what I'm saying is, if you want to resolve the issue of boredom, my idea would be that you need to find a life project. And what that means is to properly kill time so that time doesn't kill you, you need to make sure that the life project that you identify lives on 1 minute longer than you did. So if you, Weary, how old are you now?
Oh man, do you really want to know that?
Go ahead, shoot.
I'm 51.
Okay, let's say that you die at 52. And so,
Can we say 55? Give me a few more years.
Okay, 55. I'll give you 4 more years. You will have to do something in these 4 years that will last. Maybe you do a drone company that helps to survey the areas on the wetlands in Florida to preserve wild nature. Mm-hmm. And it saves a lot of birds. Wonderful, with your drone service, right? That business will have to preserve wildlife for 55 days, 55 years and 1 minute. And then you will have officially killed time. Time didn't kill you.
I beat
you
time.
Need a second life and 1 minute more longer through your project. Perhaps another point that we missed that can also be a variable for boredom, and I think with this we should skip this enclosure, right? Is the complexity of the material. Because let's say that none of us speak Chinese, correct?
No.
Okay, so if somebody were to join the session and start teaching us Chinese in Chinese, we who seems to be, at least between him and I, the most curious of the two, will be interested for a little longer, but eventually we will lose interest because the complexity of the material is far beyond our intellectual capacities at the moment, right? So I think that we've all sat down in a class where the material went way over our heads. And in doing so, we became bored.
And the other way around. If it's too easy for us, we're bored.
Or too easy for us.
We are complicated beings that way.
I think with this, we wrap it up.
I agree.
We said everything that there is to be said about boredom. If anybody has anything to add in the video, in the comments, we're going to say goodbye to Yelena so she can go to tend to her things, and then we are going to wrap it up together. Yelena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
Yelena. Nice meeting you, Yelena.
Nice to meeting you too.
We hope to see you in the future.
I hope it was not boring to hang out with me.
No.
I was trying to make it fun when I felt it becoming a little boring.
That's wonderful, and you did. We switched to you, and it's a much
again.
You you are less boring to the eye than Weeby to me, and you are less boring to the eye than I am to Weeby. Yeah.
All right.
Bye, Yelena.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Weeby. Спасибо, Yelena.
Пожалуйста.
Bye, guys.
Well, you know what? My thing, I want you to hear one last thing. This is actually a favorite quote. It's kind of a silly quote, but I've always enjoyed it. I've always remembered it. I actually looked it up. It's by Bill Watterson, right? And I think it's a little bit related to what we're talking about, boredom. So in it, it says, God put me on this earth to accomplish a certain number of things. Right now, I am so far behind, I will never die.
Right.
You can't handle the truth.